It's not just about elections. To me, it maybe you need to go coach your little league team. I got a lady in my Sunday school class who had rarely voted and asked me a year ago, what should I do? And I said, go to some school board meetings. I think it'll be revealing. Do you know she's probably going to win a school board seat in 3 weeks? Because she filed a run. She found them handing out filthy books to children, and she went nuts. And she was a 35-year teacher who just was doing her part. So we as Christians can go back and impose our will on the culture and make the culture pay attention to us. That's my ultimate goal.
Welcome to the Castle View Baptist Church podcast. I'm so excited today to have a great friend of mine with us, Chad Connelly. He is with Faith Wins. And a number of years ago in the 2016 election, Reince Priebus actually reached out to Chad and talked with him about the importance of the Christian vote. And Chad spent really his energy and his time and focus during that time to get to churches. We were one of the churches he came out to. He's been with us a couple times. And Chad, you really are probably the first person that really got me thinking about the pastor's role in engaging and equipping the church when it comes to politics. So thank you for your friendship. I love the passion that you have, and I love the conversation already. Hey, can you tell us a little bit maybe about yourself and then how you got into politics?
Yeah, well, look, Pastor Tate, you're one of the guys. I have the great pleasure of being around God's greatest servants, and that's his pastor leaders around America. But you're one of those guys I just connected to, and it was on that men's trip, but coming to your church and just having fellowship. And I even called you, what was that, about a year ago, and I was out in Castle Rock, and you were out east. And so I just love you, brother, and I appreciate your spine and your backbone and your just determination to tell the truth unapologetically. And we're not going to apologize for the gospel, and you
That's
don't.
right.
But look, it's running rampant throughout the church in our nation and the world today, where people apologize for the truth. And my story in politics, it wasn't my idea. This has been a God thing. I was an engineer, and I started speaking on just stuff that was passionate to me. I had a buddy of mine that asked me a probing question when I was fresh out of the Army. And the Army, I gave my heart to Christ when I was 13 at a youth camp in Anderson, South Carolina, and then college, engineering degree, Army. I had a Satanist in my platoon. And I don't even tell that story that much, but thinking back, it was monumental for me, Tate, to actually say, do I believe what I believe? Is this my dad's faith or my faith? And then I had a business mentor that was driving along outside of Athens, Georgia in 1991. And we were talking about the Bible. And he said, have you ever read it? Oh, I've read parts of it. He said, no. Have you read the whole thing, Genesis all the way to maps? And I'm like, no.
To the maps.
And he did a U-turn and we went to a Christian bookstore and he said, that 1 year Bible's how I started. And, a Psalm, a proverb, an Old Testament, a New Testament. And for 33 years now, it's tattered. But I've read that Bible at least one time all the way through. Not
Amen.
Because I need to impress anybody. That's for Chad. I need to immerse myself in the word.
That's right.
And what came out of that was we got to put God's people in every aspect of culture. And that's when I really got kind of tapped to get in politics. Not officially. We knocked doors, we waved signs. I started saying, you've heard me say, Jesus ain't running. Therefore, it's two sinners that you're choosing between. It's a binary choice. Don't look at a party. Even when I worked for the party, Tate, I didn't push the party or a candidate.
Yes, sir.
I pushed the policies that, we align with biblically. And so in the early 90s, my wife and I got involved. My testimony. She committed suicide in 2006. I was pretty involved in politics then. Then I met Dana on a blind date. A Christian brother kept telling me, you got to meet this girl. Just miracle after miracle after miracle. God's restoration in only a way he could design. We were both widowed by suicide. She had two adorable little girls that lost a daddy. I had two boys that had seen their mom in a pool of blood. I needed a wife. They needed parents. And so in 2007, we got married. It's amazing. That gives me emotional now. It's 17 years ago. I've watched God work. And of course, that let me get back involved in politics, was state party chairman, got to be the first ever national director of faith engagement. But to tell the truth, the message I give now, it's probably better, more refined, but it's the same thing I've said for 30 years. If Christians don't get involved in the process, I don't know what are the righteous to do. I mean, if the foundations be destroyed and they're being destroyed, and you got to look at it and say it's a lot our fault. So my mission for a long, long time has been, if we just get Christian leaders, pastors, Sunday school teachers, deacons to do the Matthew 5 salt and light aspect, man, we've changed the country. We've changed the world. And I don't know what God's doing, but we're to occupy till he comes. And I don't feel like I've done very good.
Sure, sure. That's a great answer. So we've heard a lot. I grew up with the idea that, well, listen, pastors, churches, stay out of politics. You're a 501c3. Be really careful about all of this. And you really opened my eyes to this, that it's not that the church is infringing on the culture and politics, but the culture and politics has really been infringing on theological issues. And we had a trending series we preached a few weeks ago on the sanctity of life and pro-life issues, and we're going to be preaching a message this Sunday at our church about how Christians should be voting. And so I thought it'd be perfect timing for us to sit down and just have this conversation together. What would you say to a believer that is maybe on the fence about getting involved in politics or maybe engaging in it some way? What would you say to churches about being involved?
Yeah, isn't it funny? We all grew up, people saying, "Ooh, now it's not polite company to talk about religion or politics." And when I started reading the Bible and realizing that every book has God's people talking to, with, about political leaders. And it's just inconceivable that the God who created human government would want his very own people not to be involved. And I think that's where that whole thing, you're a C3, don't lose your C3 status, and you're violating separation of church and state. You start realizing we have been lied to. We've been lied to. And some of us have bought it hook, line, and sinker. I did. I did. And honestly, it was reading the word and then reading that Understanding the Times by David Noble, the comparison of worldviews, and you start realizing everybody's got a worldview. And I started saying in political scenes and debates and stuff, look, everybody's got faith. I just don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And I remember saying that the first time, and I said, you got to believe that, two bugs bumped together in a mud puddle and poof, out came you. That takes a lot of faith. And the first time a liberal person came up to me and challenged me, he said, I don't have to have faith. I said, you got faith. I watched you. You came in this auditorium. You sat down in that chair. You didn't inspect the chair. You didn't see if the bolts were tight. You don't know who made it. Might have been from a union shop on a Friday. They could have been tired. And honestly, take that bubbled out of me. And now I'll say, look, I fly every week, 3, 4. I think I've got 10 flights this week and next to I think I'm in 10 more states in the next 20 days. And so I don't ever interview the pilot. Did you get enough sleep last night? Did you have a fight with your wife? You didn't drink too much, did you? I have faith. So the real biblical worldview is, what do we put our faith in? I believe that a supreme God designed me and you to worship and glorify him all the days of our life. And I believe he had a son named Jesus who lived a sinless life on earth and died a sinless life and died in place of me and everybody else on a cross in humiliation. And 3 days later was raised and is now the living God. And that's my worldview. And that book taught me see things through a God lens, not a people lens, not a expert's lens, not a pundit's lens. And when you do that, all these issues become clear. You also realize why people in the media and the left have worked so hard to tell us, ooh, you shouldn't be in politics. You're going to offend somebody. Well, me and you, the ones who we want to reach them. We don't want them going to hell. We have that heart. And so we back away because we're not informed enough. And let's face it, too many of our people have a pebble put in their shoe. And politics is one of those things. Listen, my God's big enough to be in everything all the time and in every aspect. And when you read Matthew 5:13-16, and he says, if the salt were to lose its savor, good for nothing, to be thrown in the street and trodden before the feet of men. I can't find where Jesus says, but don't worry about being salt and light in the political arena. And that's where we've been lied to. And so when I've run into believers, we had a town hall Sunday night, and you may know Pastor Rob Decker in Kernersville, North Carolina. He's in our Baptist world and just a super guy. And we did a town hall, and I got that question. And the question was, how do you vote between two evil people? I said, define evil, because I don't see God having a degree of sin. I see two sinners. I said, I don't think you ought to vote on party or person or personality. I think you need to look at policies and principles that line up. And I think you were standing beside me, Tate, in Durango, Colorado, that time that young pastor admitted he was a socialist. And he said, we just don't do politics in the church. And I didn't really know what to say, because he'd heard my whole talk. And I said that quick prayer, Lord, you better give me something. And I said, what do you mean? And that gave me time to pray and think. He said, we don't do the controversial stuff. And here's what the Lord gave me. Do y'all preach the Bible, the whole counsel of God?
Yeah.
And then what bubbled out was, life's not political, it's spiritual. Biblical marriage isn't political, it's spiritual. Israel is not political. They've been politicized, but I don't see how that removes my responsibility to tell the truth. And so anybody who's on the fence like that needs to look at our site, faithwins.org. We've got all kinds of platform comparisons, voter guides, doing a deep dive into issues. And I think the choice is pretty clear this time. I think there's a demonic push to sexualize our children, for anything goes sexuality, for transing our children. And there's states now, is it 3 or 4, that it's illegal, that if the school finds out your 8-year-old wants to be something different today, they can take your kids, and they can take your children, and they don't even tell the parents. That's evil. That's wicked. But there's an entire feeling that way. Oh, Israel's bad because they're pushing back and they're bombing these people who started the war. Ceasefire is their declaration. There was a ceasefire October 6th, and you broke it, and you killed a bunch of innocents in the most horrendous ways. In fact, after the election, we need to talk about bringing that Israel film to your church, brother. Pastor, I'm telling you, people leave that thing somber, but it reminds them of what goes on. And just issue after issue, border security, I don't think that's political. I think it's been politicized. And so when people tell me that, I go right at them and say, who do you think should be voting? And nature hates a vacuum. And if we're not voting our values, I can tell you there are people who don't mind voting their values, and they're not virtues, they're values to them. And so it's time we step up. I think God's given us a chance as a church to reemerge as a cultural force, and the world needs it. They need it.
Yeah. Chad, what would you say those key issues are? Because we're seeing the moral decay. We've got a school up in Littleton, a junior high school that's got a room that kids, when they get dropped off from mom and dad, they can walk into that room, change their clothes, because they identify as the opposite gender of their biology, and then they can change again before they get back in the car with mom and dad if mom and dad are not affirming of that. And so we're seeing the decay here in Colorado for sure. What would you say to a church member getting ready to cast their ballot? You mentioned lesser of two evils. Some people are struggling with sometimes that issue, and so stay out of this. What are the key issues that you would look at and say, as a Christian, biblically speaking, these are the issues that you should be making your decision based on these things?
Yeah, I think number one for Christians right now is always life. Life matters. God was the creator of life, and that ties into Judges. I'll give you, was it Judges 126 of you, Judges as in the former days, and you see the effect of governors, senators who approve judges, presidents who nominate judges. If the judges think that transing children is fine, if the judges think that the kid can change their clothes and hide it from mom and dad and lie to their parents, we have a problem. We have a serious problem. I think biblical marriage is another one. We're now down the rabbit hole completely from Obergefell. Listen, there are no definitions to marriage. If somebody comes in and says, I love my 3 cows, 2 parakeets, a dog, and 3 other women, then what are the definitions? If it's not one man, one woman in God's design, it's an anything goes, no boundaries. I think that's another issue. Israel's clearly a big issue. I was with Joel Rosenberg. I'm on one of his boards down in Carlsbad, Colorado a few weeks ago. And he says, you start realizing that America's posture in relation to Israel matters. And when they play games and the administration builds a $230 million pier to give humanitarian aid to the Gazans, in maybe a deep motive is to really help people, but they sink it 4 weeks later because it's ineffective. You start thinking money laundering. And as Joel Rosenberg said, when missiles and rockets are flying over your head, you really want America to have your back. And when there's feckless leadership, you start realizing we don't have their back right now. I think border security is another one. That's a fifth one, because it's not humane to let these children be trafficked across the border. I don't know if you've been down there, Tate. There are one of the congresswomen that spoke held up wristbands, like the what would Jesus do wristband that we all wore a few years ago. She had hundreds of them in her hand. And we can't track people supposedly, but the cartels do. The wristbands are color coded and they're numbered based on what cartel, where the money goes and where the person goes. They're organized. And then somebody on, I think it was CBS the other night, was pushing back on JD Vance, saying only a handful of apartment complexes. And he's good enough to say, do you hear yourself? A handful of apartment complexes in the United States have been overtaken by cartels, and you're okay with it? I think, but also the fentanyl poisoning. Pastor buddies of mine and yours, and way across the country. I can name a pastor in New Hampshire, one in Iowa, one in Minnesota right now, Wisconsin, where people have come drugged out, fentanyl poisoning, or somebody in their church lost a kid because they tried a marijuana cigarette or whatever that was fentanyl laced. It's affecting every state. Everybody's a border state. And don't even mention grocery prices and the economy and spending like as Reagan said, we spend money like drunken sailors, and that's not fair to the sailors. At least it was their money. I believe our nation is in for a rough patch, no matter who wins. But I believe that the policies that get us out of that patch are what's going to make the difference. And I think that's why you're seeing things come out the way they are coming out. And I believe the cakes are pretty much baked now. But Christians got to go vote. Don't take it for assumption. And I'll tell you what I want to do is I want to go to states like yours, where a bunch of homosexual billionaires took the state over very intentionally 12, 15 years ago, and I think needs to be rectified. You and I are going to have a great conversation about that coming up. And so all those issues matter. And when a Christian breaks those down and looks at them, and if they'll go to our faithwins.org site, we've got those comparisons. We've got scripture backing it up. You can find it for anybody, any state, in fact. And we need to do that and go vote our values. And then the other thing I do is I'm here to deputize you to tell everybody you know to go vote your values.
What are the current stats for Christians voting? I've seen some things from Barna recently. I wonder what you're hearing.
George Barna was with us when he revealed that latest. I'm going to put an email out. I honestly haven't barely had time to change my mind the last few weeks. And I'm on so many planes in the next 12 days. I'm going to push that out right before the election. And George gave me permission to do that. He has the finger on the pulse of the Christian community and the whole faith community better than anybody. He says there's 31 million evangelical Christians who've already said, I'm not going to vote. But he also, when you do a deep dive, you got to get down into the weeds of his study. And that's why I need to peel it apart. And I've actually got a pastor buddy of mine and yours that's kind of helping me peel that apart right now. When you get into there, the number one way those 31 million said, yeah, I'd go vote, is if their pastor tells them it's important. 17% of the people who they're disgusted by, I don't like either candidate, they're both evil, the parties are awful, I don't trust the election process, whatever their excuse, 17%, that's 5 million people, brother. 5 million Christians would go vote their biblical values if their pastor said, hey, this is a big deal. Go do your biblical obligation to vote by the Bible, and we change the country. But it's, I tell people this too, this is important. It's not just about elections. To me, maybe you need to go coach your little league team. Maybe you need to run the scouting group instead of letting somebody who, we know what's going on there. Maybe you need to go run for office, but it's school board, it's city council. I got a lady in my Sunday school class who had rarely voted and asked me a year ago, what should I do? And I said, go to some school board meetings. I think it'll be revealing. Do you know she's probably going to win a school board seat in 3 weeks? Because she filed a run. She found them handing out filthy books to children, and she went nuts. And she was a 35-year teacher who just was doing her part. So we as Christians can go back and impose our will on the culture and make the culture pay attention to us. That's my ultimate goal. It's not about politics at all. To me, it's just an avenue, right?
Yeah,
It focuses attention. So that's what I tell people. And the numbers, that 17%, that's where I put all my effort, brother. That's where I put all my effort.
Mm. So after the 2020 election, I had texted you and I were texting back and forth, and a lot of people feel like, whether there was or not, a lot of people feel like there was some interference and some fraud that took place. And I asked you in 2020 if we're going to be doing something to ensure that our election process is fair and monitored. Have we made some progress in all of that? Do we have confidence this year?
Yeah, and I think that the media has been involved in this whole thing. I mean, the laptop story is enough election interference. Don't even go into the voting irregularities, right? 51 security officials said the laptop story was a hoax, and of course it was true. So they suppressed information about the Biden family, and that was a cover up to beat all cover ups. A huge scandal. So after you and I talked in 2021, some buddies of ours, Evangelist Byron Fox, Pastor Tom Alvis, Pastor John Godfrey Jr., young guy in Virginia Beach, Dr. Mike Edwards, you probably know them from our world. We sat in a room, 7 of us. They said, what can we do? And I said, look, let's go do 2 things. Number 1, register everybody to vote. Let's find 25 churches and 10 house districts. And number 2, let's tell them to vote biblical values. Don't tell them to vote for. And they had that governor who had approved the new law that if babies survived abortions, we'd let them die comfortably. That got them animated. When my goal was to find 250 churches, they found 312. And they registered 77,000 Christians who never voted. And a guy named Glenn Youngkin, who's a godly man, a believer, and pro-life and all that stuff, is now the governor. Out of that, though, we recruited poll watchers. This is to your question. We found 1,343 Christians, not trained political hacks, not somebody who took political science, church groups. 1,343 people became poll watchers, brother. And you wouldn't believe the stuff. I told them to look for 2 things: people over 100 who voted, because we think you should be alive to vote, and more than 6 registered in a household. And one day they called me and said, Chad, we found an address where 17 people are registered to vote. What do you think? I said, I think it's a really big house. Why don't y'all run by there? It was a field, brother. And that was the first election official that did get indicted and arrested in Virginia. There were 3 that were caught doing funny business. And of course, when Youngkin won, I thought, hey, we never told people to vote for. We're on to something. And so right now, and this will give your folks some good feelings and assurance, 7 states, we're recruiting Christian poll watchers. And I told donors, I even said this in a place called Mar-a-Lago back in the spring, you're going to have political people tell you they got 11 kabillion. That's a number that means infinite. I made it up, but it means a huge number. And they're going to have 11 kabillion poll watchers, and they're young people, and they're just interested in meeting your metrics. They're going to put those names down. My numbers will be modest, but they'll be honest. In 4 states, Pastor, 4 states, we've had party or campaign people call our pastor leaders. I have pastor leaders in those 7 states who are recruiting in churches only. Got to be a believer. We're going to put Christian eyeballs on the process. And these are random states, but you'll notice them: Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona. And so we have at least 100. I think the biggest state, we got over 300 now in Pennsylvania. I think in those 7 states, we're a little over 880 so far. And our guys are just growing it. They're finding people all over the place. They ran into some in a church in Pennsylvania last week. We were there, who had signed up through a campaign, who never got called back. So it fulfilled kind of what I told people earlier. You're going to put people down, but unless they're being followed up and trained and credentialed, they won't matter. And so our people, we don't even put them on the list until they're trained, credentialed, and slotted into a precinct. I was, where was I? Spoke at CPAC in March or April. And I saw this guy came out of the green room, and I was walking back. I was going to stand in the back of the room and just watch and just enjoy anonymity and relax and get me a hot dog or something. This guy made a beeline for me. Turns out it was Trump's lead attorney in Georgia and Arizona. And he said, we just couldn't quantify enough in the time. He said, but Chad, you can't, if people are bent on evil and cheating, you can't fix it all. He said, I believe what you're doing covers 75 to 80% of the problem, just having presence. There's power in presence. We're going to do that in your state soon, brother. We're going to put people in poll watching positions, because I know in my heart of hearts, we are doing the exact right thing. We're in the middle. and we're on the ground. I had somebody from the campaign call me yesterday. What are you hearing in these states from your pastors? And these are pastors who are recruiting in churches. They're trusted, they're reliable, and that right in the middle of Detroit, in the middle of Philadelphia, in the middle of Atlanta, we have Christians who profess the name of Jesus as Lord, who are in those key spots. And I think it's a big deal.
Good. I've heard from people that have said, "Listen, why even go vote if we don't have confidence in it?" And so I think that's a great word. Chad, if there were people in our church that are looking to find out more about where the candidates stand and where they stand on these issues, where would you send them?
Yeah, tell them to go to faithwins.org, Faith, faithwins, WINS.org. And we have resources. We have every state in the union. There's Biblical Voter Guide, there's iVoter Guide. All those are Christian sources. Faith and Freedom has a great comparison. A lot of our friends have voter comparisons that go through the issues. I don't do that. I don't have the bandwidth, and you got to have really good researchers and all that. But all those resources are on there. You can print them out. They're PDFs. You can hand those out. One that I'm using a lot is firstliberty.org. And we have that linked on our site too. That's our friends, Kelly Shackelford, our buddies at Christian Law Association have them. But we've put those resources on our site. People can go there and grab them, print them off, hand them out at church. Make that available for people because it will overcome their, I shouldn't go vote. Oh, yeah, you should. You absolutely should.
Sure. And so faithwins.org. Last question. You just kind of mentioned it. You mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but I wanted to get your take on this. I've heard several times people say things like, hey, I cast my ballot in 2020, and while I cast it, I had to hold my nose. Or I have to vote for the lesser of two evils. What would you say to somebody like that that's frustrated about voting because they don't feel like they've got a candidate as a believer that they really are excited to get behind?
We'd love to have, Pastor Tate Throndson run.
No, you wouldn't.
we would love to have somebody we can have confidence in. That's the whole reason I tell people Jesus is not running. And everybody's a sinner by definition. So every vote is a vote for the lesser two evils. I mean, look, I'm frustrated too. And if you want to hold your nose, that's fine. I'd tell you to vote for policies. One side is just they've lost their ever loving minds. And even the side that I've worked in, I'm not excited about the party. I got kicked off the platform, committee by my own party because I was too conservative and too Christian. I'm going to be fighting that, but at least I'm at the table. And at least I know where the policies are. And so look at policies and compare them to your Bible. And we can't vote for somebody who's not going to support Israel fully. We can't support somebody who's for anything goes marriage. We can't support somebody who's ready to kill babies up to and including birth. That's sick.
Yes, sir.
That's just sick. We can't vote for people who are for open borders and letting fentanyl poisoning and human trafficking go everywhere. We can't vote for people who are okay with inflation and spending out the crazy like never before. I think it's as clear cut as it's ever been, but I don't think we ever need to take it for granted. I think we need to go vote our values. And like I said, I've been telling people I'm deputizing y'all. Me and Pastor Tate can't get everywhere. You need to talk to everybody you know. And if you got to hand out those voter guides and those platform comparisons, tell people, tell believers, I'm with you. I feel your pain. To use a Clinton quote. I don't disagree. I'm as frustrated within my own party structure sometimes as I can be. But I also understand policies and issues matter. And when there's a proven track record, and I know a lot of people who will be around one group of people if they get elected, and you and I don't know and don't share values with anybody that's going to be around that other group of people. And I think it's pretty clear cut where our folks ought to be, and that's voting biblical values.
Thank you for taking a few minutes. The George Barna poll that I saw recently said 51% of believers are not planning on going to the polls here in 2024. And I feel like for us as Salt and Light and believers that can take a biblical worldview and understand the issues, we are missing out on such an amazing opportunity as a church. And so thank you for helping our church to understand what these issues are. Thank you for motivating us to go out and vote. And Chad, thank you for making it really your life's work at this point to get out and to get people in office that, as you said, are not perfect. But we've got to begin voting these Christian values. And so our church will pray for you, Chad, as you're out these next 2-3 weeks or so. I know you are all over the place. And so thank you for taking just a few minutes with us today. And Castleview, don't forget, faithwins.org would be a great place. And I want to encourage you to do everything that you can to not just vote yourself, but to encourage other people, your family members, your friends, people in the church. We've got to do everything that we can to be a part of what is going on to shape our nation. Hey, thank you for listening again to the Castleview Baptist Church podcast. We'll see you next time.